it's exciting, and it's just nice to know that the family, the farm, the Quaker heritage, the stewardship of the land is being recognized.
In the late 1600s, William Evans, Joseph's great-great-great-great-grandfather, emigrated from England to the United States with his parents, and in 1701 would begin the Evans farming legacy by purchasing 1,000 acres of land from Margaret Cook in Evesham Township, New Jersey. An additional deed for the land would be drawn up for purchase from the local Lenape Native Americans, confirming the ownership of the land being transferred over to William Evans. The farm would be used primarily for self-sustaining dairy operations, with vegetables being grown to meet the family's immediate needs. The farmland William purchased would be divided among his descendants, granting William Evans, Joseph's great-great-grandfather, ownership of about 400 acres of the southernmost portion. This area of the land was named Hillside Farm and would become the home of William and Susan Evans. Their son Joseph Evans ultimately took over Hillside Farm. From there, Joseph would continue operations of a dairy farm with his wife Lydia Wills Evans and their 4 children. In 1869, Evans and Wills was started by good friends Joseph Evans and his brother-in-law Joshua Stokes Wills, after they recognized wild cranberries growing on the property of Henry Wills, Joshua's father. Seeing as both Joseph and Joshua had great experience with farming, the 2 friends saw this as an opportunity to go into business together and try something new. Their wives, on the other hand, were not too keen on the idea, seeing it as too risky. Nevertheless, the 2 proceeded, receiving Henry's portion of the land as a gift and purchasing the other portion from Joshua's brother and another owner. This initial property would be named Friendship Farm, and Joseph and Joshua would even name 2 of the first cranberry bogs on the property after each of their wives. Thus, Evans and Wills was born. Their risk would turn out to be fruitful and bring the families together in success and pride.
They had big family dinners once a month. They had monthly meeting, and people came from all around to the Quaker meeting for business, and all their cousins came and they had a dinner.
Their cranberry business would expand. While Hillside Farm remained a dairy farm, other cranberry growing properties were purchased in addition to Friendship: Coexon and Willow Farm.
1869, they made the first purchase, and then when they actually formed the company, it was a partnership initially, I guess, and then they incorporated in 1931, I think. They made a major purchase, but then they kept adding to it, little bits to it.
In addition to their initial purchase of Friendship in 1869, Evans and Wills bought land from the estate of Lydia Stokes Wills in 1882, creating Coexon Farm. In 1903, they purchased the Willow Farm. Evans and Wills incorporated in 1930 as Evans and Wills Incorporated.
Joseph Evans started buying up land that was near the Willow Farm and started his own cranberry business, the Joseph Evans Company. And then ultimately that was incorporated within the Willow Farm. And the business really started, I think, down along the shorelines because they realized that cranberries help prevent scurvy. Early cranberries were harvested and sold to the ships.
There's a lot of ditching involved in all the irrigation, the water levels right. So repairing the dams and the ditches is a big project.
Cranberries, yeah. It was all hand-picked initially, and then eventually the cranberry scoop was invented, which I'm not sure whether that's an advantage over hand-picking or not. It's back-breaking work, bending down. So the flooding the bogs and picking that way is really a relatively new phenomenon in terms of the cranberry business.
The pickers of the blueberries came from Philadelphia in crews at that time. Earlier, they had probably lived in the summer in the farm. At least they had for cranberries. At that point, they were still coming in on a daily basis from Philadelphia. And in the cranberry part of the packing house in the fall, There were large numbers of pickers who came and lived for a time, and they had cookhouse there. You know, Ted Gordon showed us all those things, the cookhouses and the where people slept. All those little buildings have gone, and they were gone by the time I was a child. Even though the cranberry business was still going when I was a child, the labor all was just imported, mostly on a daily basis.
They were bussed in from Camden and Willow Farm. A foreman who had a bus, and he would just drive through and pick people up on the corners and bring them in, and they'd pick for the day. They all had cranberries, and Friendship was the only one that had blueberries.
I was like 6 years old. I was playing, and my mother and about 5 other women were packing in the packing house. This is blueberries. All the family was involved in packing the blueberries there. So I was never involved in the cranberries because it was in the fall and I was in school. Nothing was really mechanized when I was a child. I mean, there was a conveyor belt for the blueberries, but that was about the extent of the mechanization.
Exactly.
Everything else was done by hand.
The cranberries came through in the middle, and then there was 2 divisions on the belt, one above and one below, and the rotten berries went on one, and the green berries went to the other. So you had to be pretty deft when you were sorting. They dropped the berries, and the good berries would bounce because they have so much air inside them, and the rotten ones didn't.
Yeah, rotten berries goes splat. The packing for the blueberries was they were put in boxes by the pickers, little boxes like we have now, only they were made of wood. And then the women placed a saran wrap over the box, the full box of berries, and then put a form over that pushed it down, and then put a rubber band around it and took the form off. And that was packing. Of course, they were sorted, through on the conveyor belt. You had to pull out the bad ones. But there was nothing mechanized about it.
However, as time moves on, markets begin to change, and as new generations begin, families turn their focus elsewhere.
The house that's in the background there is the house that I grew up in. That was a tenant house on the farm. When they cleared the land between the 2 houses, this is right on the edge of the property where the main house is, to put an orchard in. We did not live in the main house until I was 14, I guess. We lived in one of the tenant houses because Aunt Mary was still alive, and so she still lived in the main house.
Ezra had a farm called Stockton in Medford, down in the family, that was a dairy and vegetable farm that he moved to after he got married. He moved from Hillside to there. So that was where my mother grew up, and I grew up in a house next, and then lived in it myself when I was married. Now we live across the street.
Hillside was the dairy farm that was operated by Joseph, and then Joseph S., and then my father, William Henry. And Dad also managed the Willow Farm for the Evans and Wills enterprise. And Alice's father managed Friendship, and then ultimately took ownership of Friendship when the family split the properties up, the farms up. And Fran Sharpless managed a lot of it for a while, but he took Coexum.
This is the blueberry packing in the 1950s. My mother. And the white, the red is Dot Cutts, who worked there. And that's my brother Tom, the boy in the middle, and my brother David on the right. So they all helped out. And I was too little. I just played. Friendship stopped in 1958, I believe. And so I was going to be 7. I was only 6.
Willow Farm basically stopped in 59, so I would have been 9. And the 2 barns were actually torched by an arsonist in the late 80s.
Dairy profitability would hit its peak in the 1920s and plummet by 1969. With this, farmers had to make a choice. William H. Evans Jr., son of William Henry, who inherited the farm from his uncle, Joseph Evans, elected to sell the dairy herd at Hillside Farm in 1969.
My father could not afford to feed 100 cows as pets, as he put it. It was, so he sold the cows, and he continued to raise, soybeans and hay and so forth on the property for a while. And then he started renting it to other farmers as he grew older and letting them raise crops. So, and then he sold ultimately to the schools. When Seltzer bought the property, and he was working with a man named Reagan they really were environmentally conscious, and so when the King's Grant was laid out, it was laid out to be very natural and so forth. And they had this grand plan that they were going to make the packing house into a restaurant and have the sorting tables as the bar put glass across the top, and they'd have cranberries floating through while you had your cocktail and whatever. They actually got far enough in the process that they put new windows in, but then they never got any further. At that point, it would have been a major undertaking, but they started it, and then they decided that they didn't have the funds.
Coexon split off in 1951. Fran Sharpless, who was the grandson of Joshua Wills. So Joshua Wills had two daughters.
Still in the family at that point.
Still in the family. It was Francis Sharpless. And he's the one that sold it to Tom Gerber, who owns it now.
William Henry Evans sold parts of Hillside Farm back to Evesham Township and Lenape High School District. The property has since been abandoned, with the township knocking down most of the buildings that originally belonged to the farm, with the exception of the family house, which is maintained by the Lenape High School District. The woodlands and wetlands are part of Evesham Township's open space.
The Willow Farm, the original Willow Farm, the smaller part of the property that Evans and Wills bought, is King's Grant development, but all the land that Joseph Evans bought surrounding that is actually part of Black Run Preserve, which is open space in Evesham Township. So it's kind of nice to see those properties all back in natural state and public use.